Chapter 1. The Glitch in the System. Elijah Brooks sat cross-legged on the fraying edge of his twin bed, the glow of his old laptop flickering across his face like a lighthouse barely cutting through fog. It was 6:02 a.m., and outside their second-floor apartment in South Glenview, the city was just beginning to hum to life. Early buses groaned awake, dogs barked behind chain-link fences, and the occasional siren wailed in the distance. The laptop in question, a battered Delta-Core Z4 from 2015, was held together by electrical tape and stubbornness. Its trackpad lagged, the screen flickered when opened more than a 90-degree angle, and the spacebar only worked if hit dead center. But Elijah treated it like it was gold-plated. "Still working, that thing?" came a gravelly voice from the hallway. His father, Leonard Brooks, leaned against the doorway in his Navy security uniform, thermos in one hand, duffel bag in the other. His face was worn with years of overnights and double shifts, but his eyes held pride when they landed on Elijah. "It's holding up," Elijah replied, angling the screen just right so the display didn't cut out. "Besides, I got all my code backed up online now." Leonard nodded slowly, the way someone does when they wish they could offer more but know the budget's already stretched thin. With his daughter Maya's orthodontist bills piling up and the plumbing acting up again in the kitchen, a new computer just wasn't an option. "You're making it work." "That's what matters," Leonard said. "That's what Brooks men do." Elijah smiled faintly, absorbing the quiet encouragement before his father disappeared down the hall, off to another 12-hour shift. The apartment felt emptier without him, though Maya's soft snoring from the next room added a sense of comfort. This was home. Messy, crowded, barely holding together, but home. Westbridge Academy stood in sharp contrast to everything Elijah knew. The private high school looked more like a tech startup headquarters than a school. Glass walls, minimalist furniture, state-of-the-art computer labs, even a smoothie bar. Elijah had earned a full scholarship here thanks to his math scores and a personal essay that Leonard still kept printed in his wallet. But scholarships didn't buy social status. That morning, as Elijah unpacked his old Delta-Core in the sleek, ultramodern lab, he could already feel eyes on him. He chose the back corner, as he always did, less visible, less vulnerable. "Oh my God," a voice rang out, loud enough for everyone to hear. Is that a Delta-Core Z4? Elijah didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Landon Chase. Polished shoes. Polo shirt tucked too perfectly. Son of a CTO at Vegacorp, one of the biggest tech giants in the region. Landon's laptop alone probably cost more than Elijah's family spent on groceries in a month. "Did you borrow that from a museum or something?" Landon asked, his voice syrupy with sarcasm. Laughter trickled around the room like a slow leak. Elijah said nothing. Just powered on the machine and waited patiently as it buzzed and groaned through the boot-up sequence. The screen blinked twice before the desktop finally appeared. Ms. Whitaker entered just as the tension peaked. Sharp suit. High heels. A sense of constant judgment carried in her stride. "Mr. Brooks," she said, spotting him almost immediately. "Still working on that charming relic?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "It does the job," Elijah said quietly. "Well," she replied, eyes flitting to Landon's top-tier device. "We'll see how it holds up during next week's advanced development projects. Might be time to think about borrowing one of the school's machines. Just so you're not left behind." The words stung more than the laughter. Borrowing a school computer might seem like a helpful offer to someone else. But to Elijah, it sounded like pity. Worse, like she didn't believe in him at all. That afternoon, Elijah sat outside the library, his laptop on his knees, headphones in, lost in his world of code. He was refining a simple resource allocator algorithm, one designed to help older systems run smoother by shifting processing power toward core tasks. It wasn't flashy, but it was efficient. "Hey," a soft voice said. He looked up to find a girl standing nearby, holding a worn leather notebook. "Amira," she said. "I sit 2 rows behind you in comp sci." Elijah nodded. He remembered her quiet, observant. Never laughed at Landon's jokes. "Just wanted to say, your code in the peer review last week? It was solid. Like, really efficient. I saw what you did with the memory partitioning." For the first time that day, Elijah smiled, really smiled. "Thanks," he said. She nodded, then turned to leave, but paused. "Don't let them get in your head," she added. "They only laugh because they don't know how to create without luxury." At home that night, Elijah replayed the day in his head. The mockery. Ms. Whitaker's smile. Amira's words. He stayed up past midnight refining his code. Not for Ms. Whitaker. Not even for Landon. For himself. Because deep down, he believed something no one else did yet. That even a glitchy, flickering old laptop could be the launch pad for something that might just change the world. Chapter 2. Crash and Burn. The following week arrived like a storm Elijah couldn't dodge. The Westbridge Annual Tech Showcase, a school tradition where students unveiled their most ambitious programming projects to an auditorium full of parents, faculty, alumni, and tech company scouts, was being hyped like a red carpet premiere. "You've been working on something, haven't you?" Amira asked quietly one afternoon as they studied in the computer lab. "Yeah," Elijah replied, rubbing his eyes. "It's a resource allocator, an algorithm that optimizes how low-performance systems handle modern applications. Inspired by my laptop's daily fight to survive." Amira smiled faintly. "That sounds real, like it might actually help people." But the truth was, Elijah wasn't sure it would survive the stage. The presentation system required polished visuals, graphics, animations, transitions. His laptop barely supported color-coded outputs without glitching. "Mr. Brooks," Ms. Whitaker called across the lab, interrupting his train of thought. "I assume your creation will be ready for demonstration tomorrow?" "It will," Elijah answered, though his chest tightened. She nodded with a knowing smile. "Let's hope your hardware can keep up." The next morning, the auditorium buzzed with energy. Students clustered around booths displaying everything from augmented reality interfaces to machine learning chatbots. Tech scouts roamed with clipboards. Parents sipped overpriced coffee. Elijah stood at the side of the stage, heart pounding, laptop warm in his hands. He'd done his best to slim down the interface, compress the visual layers, streamline the code. But it was still a gamble. Ms. Whitaker took the mic. "We'll begin with Mr. Elijah Brooks," she announced with artificial cheer. "A promising student with a unique approach. Let's get the fundamentals out of the way, shall we?" He knew then. She'd set him up, just as Amira had warned. Elijah connected his laptop to the projector. The interface appeared, flickering, pixelated, colors bleeding into each other like watercolor. The demo stuttered. The screen froze halfway through the animation. Laughter rippled through the audience. Ms. Whitaker stepped in with a sympathetic smile that didn't quite hide her satisfaction. "Well, I think we get the idea," she said briskly. "Perhaps next time a simpler approach would be more effective." Elijah unplugged his laptop, jaw clenched, cheeks burning. Behind the curtain, Amira waited. "She does this every year," she said quietly. "Last year, she humiliated a kid for his database model. He left Westbridge by semester's end." "I'm not leaving," Elijah whispered. That night, as the city slept, he opened his flickering laptop once again and began to build something new. Clapperboard Final Chapter, Rewriting the System. Chapter 3, From Ashes to Blueprint. At 2:41 a.m., Elijah's fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't just fixing the algorithm. He was rewriting it. No graphics. No animations. Just pure logic. He sketched out a framework, software that could analyze a machine's available resources and reconfigure application demands to match. Instead of requiring more, it would learn to do more with less. His father's voice startled him from the doorway. "You okay?" "Yeah," Elijah replied. "I think I just figured something out." Leonard stepped in, quietly placing a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Your mom used to say you were born seeing the world different. Guess she was right." The next week, Elijah found a flyer at the corner store bulletin board. Free Computer Skills Workshop, Tuesdays at 5 p.m., Community Tech Lab. The lab wasn't much, mismatched chairs, ancient desktops. But inside stood Dr. Calvin Wright, a retired systems engineer with the spirit of a revolutionary. "You're Elijah?" Dr. Wright asked after Elijah introduced himself. "You're right on time. We're talking about making old machines dance." Over the next 2 hours, Elijah explained what he was building. Dr. Wright listened, eyes narrowing with interest. "You're flipping the architecture," he murmured. "Building for minimum capacity instead of assuming maximum availability. That's not just efficient, that's democratic computing." From that day on, Elijah returned every week. And then every day. Within 6 weeks, the code was no longer an algorithm. It was a framework, dynamic, scalable, intuitive. A name emerged. ART, Adaptive Resource Technology. Dr. Wright helped him enter the National EdTech Innovation Challenge. A long shot, maybe, but Elijah had stopped playing by the odds. Chapter 4, The Stage Revisited. 3 weeks later, Elijah stood inside the downtown Glass Point Convention Center. Marble floors, corporate banners, rows of judges and representatives from top tech firms. He was the youngest finalist, the only one from a low-income school. And yet, the only one with a working prototype running on a 10-year-old laptop. His name was called. He stepped onto the stage. "Why," he began, "do we assume that better technology means more expensive technology? What if the real innovation is access?" For 6 minutes, he demoed Art, a 2013 tablet running modern educational software with ease, a clunky desktop transformed into a capable workstation. "The digital divide isn't just about who has devices," he said. "It's about who can keep up." When he finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then the applause came. Thunderous. Real. From the crowd, he saw Ms. Whitaker's face, frozen in disbelief. An hour later, the judge returned to the stage. "The winner of this year's EdTech Innovation Challenge," he announced, "is Elijah Brooks." Cheers erupted. Elijah barely heard them. His eyes searched for his father, for Dr. Wright, for Amira. They were all standing, cheering, crying. Chapter 5. The movement begins. What followed was a whirlwind. MIT scholarship. A mentorship with Sarah Chun, founder of one of the biggest accessibility tech firms in the country. A signed partnership agreement where Elijah retained 51% ownership of Art. And most importantly, the creation of the Brooks Wright Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to bringing art into under-resourced schools across America. Within 2 years, Art was running in 27 states and 4 countries. One day, Elijah returned to Westbridge, not as a student, but as a keynote speaker. "I used to sit right there," he said from the stage, pointing to the back corner. "Told myself I didn't belong, that I had to prove something. But I learned something else. When you design from scarcity, you discover a creativity that abundance can't teach." He looked out into the crowd, saw a young girl holding a duct-taped laptop, eyes wide, questions burning in her mind. After the event, she approached him, nervous, eager. "My name's Kiana," she said. "I'm building an audio processing tool, but it crashes a lot." "Let me see it," Elijah smiled. "I think I can help." Epilogue. Beyond the frame. 5 years later, the Johnson Wright Technology Access Center opened its doors in South Glenview. A former warehouse turned innovation hub. Workshops, mentorships, community labs, old machines repurposed, new futures built. And at the heart of it all stood Elijah, no longer the boy who was mocked, but the man who rewrote the system that failed him. Outside, a 12-year-old boy demonstrated his own modified laptop to a crowd of stunned developers. "Reminds me of someone," Dr. Wright said, grinning beside Elijah. Inside the lab, laughter echoed. Screens glowed. Potential thrived. Elijah looked out over it all, the center, the city, the faces, and whispered to the memory of the boy he once was. "This is just the beginning."